All right, let's add more seams to this to clean some of this up. Let me move this over and go back to our solid view. And if I select, say, this edge, and I'm going to run the edge up like this, and down and over, so we break out this whole piece here, like this, Control E, mark seam. And then I think we should select this seam in the center of this inset. So instead of going in and trying to select every little edge in there, what I'm going to do is just switch to face mode, select it, and then switch back to edge mode. And now all those edges are selected. So now let's press Control E and mark seam, and we've got those in there. Let's take a look at the sides here. What we can do is mark a seam all the way around each of these doors. Let's press Alt-click there, and that selects all of that. We're probably not going to want the ones in the center there, but let's go ahead and continue. Alt-Shift-click, Alt-Shift-click all the way around here, and Alt-Shift-click all the way around there. So that gets all the edges around the door. Let's now press Shift and click these edges to deselect them, like this. And then let's apply our seams to that. Control E and mark seam. On the inside here, this loop around the inside of the door, we're probably going to want to select edges up at the top and at the bottom and mark a seam there so that this row of faces here will break out into its own UV island, and this row of faces here will break out into its own. Let's come over here and do a similar thing with these. Control E, mark seam. There we go. And let's go around and do that same thing on the other side. Alt-click, Alt-Shift-click all the way around there. Alt-Shift-click there. And then let's press Shift and click and deselect these. There we go. Control E, mark seam, and then let's add a seam on the top and the bottom of each of these doors here. Mark seam here and down here. There we go. Now I think we're ready to at least try and UV map this. Oh, however, I haven't put an edge along the back of here. Let's try this. Let me add an edge or add a seam along these edges right here. Mark seam. And let's do that over here. Right here. This, and this. Let's mark these seams. And maybe I'll also add a seam right in there to break these two out. What that's going to do is break this panel out on its own as its own UV island and this panel out on its own. So let's try that. Okay, so to UV map this, let's press the A key to select all the faces, and then let's press U and unwrap, and let's see how we did. Well, that's looking quite a bit better. If we switch over to our Look Dev now, you can see that it's mainly taken care of most of that stretching. There's a little bit of warping up here. We might be able to work on that by adding edges in there, but I think that's going to be okay. It's generally going to be a uniform color up there. And yeah, I think all of these look pretty good too. There's one thing that's concerning me though, and let me switch back to solid. And that's these things right here. You see how we've got this kind of stretching? They're stretching to try and connect edges that don't have continuous connections, like this one here. See how that edge really doesn't have a connection over to the other side? This one too. So oftentimes when you have these edges along an n-gon like this, so this face right here is an n-gon because it has more than 4 sides. This is just all one face here. And sometimes when you have an n-gon like this, you can have this kind of stretching. So how do you fix that? Well, you could go through and add edges along here and to connect this edge and this edge up, right? You could add edges using the knife tool to cut edges up to here. But that's really adding more polygons. One thing that we can do is, instead of adding more polygons, is just triangulate the face that's here. So I think we talked about this back when we were creating the hood and the front fender. We can convert this Ngon to triangles by right-clicking and choosing Triangulate Faces. And when we do that, that's what we get. So it seems like we're adding a lot of geometry to this, but in fact we're not. If you look down here at the bottom of the screen, it says number of tries 246. If we deselect those, you can see that's how many tries there are on this whole object. If I undo this, press Control Z and undo the triangulation, take a look at it here, it's still 246. So when we triangulate this, we're not adding any extra faces, we're just triangulating it in the same way that Unity is going to be doing that when we take it into the game engine. And when we do that, if you noticed before, it cleans that up. So we can just go through here, triangulate these faces, and clean our UV map up. So if I select this one now, and right-click and triangulate faces, you can also press Control T. That cleans that up. Let's select everything and see how we're doing. It looks like we've got some down here on the bottom. So let's come down here and select this face here. Yep, sure enough. Let's press Control T. Cleans that up. And let's press Control T. There we go. Let's hit A and see how we're doing. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Once again, if we come over here, we can see our texture. I think that looks pretty good. All right. So let's hit that division key, and there's what we've UV mapped so far. Let's go back over to a solid view. And what else should we work on? Well, we could work on the doors here. Why don't we do that? Let's hit the division key, and there they are. And let's also come over here and remove that mirror modifier. We don't need that on there for now. Let's tab into edit mode and see what we can do. Well, in terms of removing edges, there is one thing we could do. We had extruded this out, and when we did, we created this edge right here. So we could select this edge and get rid of it. Let's do that. Hit X and dissolve edges. Same thing over here. So once again, as we're UV mapping, we're just looking for ways to make the model a little more efficient. Let's now select these faces on the interior. We can select these here and then press Control E and mark seam. The problem is it's also selected those, so we can just select these two edges right here and press Control E and clear seam. So we don't have those. We don't need those selected. I'll do the same thing here. I'll go to face mode, hit the C key, select these faces, hit the 2 key, and then mark seams. Now I can go to edge mode, select these 3, and remove or clear those seams there. All right, now it also looks like there are faces here on the back that we just don't need at all. Let's go ahead and delete those. There. And we could also maybe select some of these edges here on the corners so that as this lays out flat, these kind of pull apart a bit, like tabs on a construction kit. I'll show you what I mean here. Let's press Control E and mark seam. And I'm just going to hit the L key and select only this door here. Hit U and unwrap. And you can see how they're kind of breaking apart here, like that, so they lay flat a little better. Right, so let's do that over here as well. I'll select this edge. Oh, let's select these two, this one, and maybe this one here. Let's go ahead and add seams there. Now if we select everything and hit U and unwrap, that's what we get. If we come up here to our Look Dev view, we can apply that material that we just created to this object. So let's come up here to the material pull down, select material, and there it is. Now we should probably change the name of this material. Let's call this UV test pattern. There we go. So we know what it is as we continue working on this. And there we go. So that looks pretty good. let's go back to our solid view, and let's press the division key to go back to the vehicle. Now, you may notice that we don't have the doors over here, and that's fine. This is the way I'm going to be working as we go, because ultimately I'm going to want to UV map and place the UV islands before I add the mirror modifier back onto this. And you'll see why as we go forward. But in the next video, what let's do is go ahead and work on the windows here and the door handles.